Power imbalances in a marriage can have a nasty habit of spilling into divorce proceedings if things end poorly. Joining us for more on this is Laura Paris, family lawyer at Shulman Law Firm. Good to see you, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so this is an interesting concept, the idea of the power imbalance in any relationship, but of course in a divorce, things can definitely become a little more strained, and maybe that imbalance shows itself. What are we talking about here in terms of an imbalance? How is that playing out?
So you definitely see, we see power imbalances in almost every relationship that crosses our path as family lawyers. Now, in some circumstances, it varies from couple to couple. Of the most common power imbalances, you see it in circumstances of domestic abuse, sometimes because due to cultural differences, but the most predominant power imbalance is as a result of financial disparities between the parties.
Now, when I think about, I'm married, and I've been married for a while, and you sort of have like a division of duties. One person does this, one person that. Can this power imbalance sort of start off innocently enough, saying, well, you're good with that stuff, so you just worry about it, but then the relationship, devolves, and suddenly you find out, I don't know enough about that important part of our life, our financial life.
Absolutely, and that's actually exactly where this comes from. I mean, especially when we're looking at traditional marriage dynamics, where there's one party that is working and the other party staying at home. Naturally, these roles develop, and you almost don't even realize after years and years that, for example, if you're the party who's staying at home taking care of the children or taking care of the household duties, you realize one day, I don't really have a good grasp of how much my spouse earns. I don't really have a good grasp of what our financial situation is. And if I come around now to want to understand it, that's going to be a major learning curve for me. And these things do happen. It doesn't necessarily happen as a result of a breakdown of a relationship. They actually, these power imbalances develop in even healthy relationships.
So how do we head that kind of thing off before we end up in a situation where two people are splitting up and suddenly you realize there's a really unequitable situation? I mean, does it make sense for people to have separate accounts, sort of have a hold of their own financial life apart from the joint finances?
Absolutely. I think that the one piece of advice that you want to give to anybody who's entering a relationship is be able to be independent. Always look at, not necessarily to look at life as in, worst case scenario type of way, but at the same time be prepared. It may happen one day that the relationship doesn't work out, whether by way of divorce or maybe something happens. So you want to be able to know at the end of the day that you're going to be able to prosper independently. And if that means you getting, early understanding of how your finances work and being sure that you're involved in those conversations, then that's definitely a good way to start.
Okay, so if someone hasn't made those moves and they're finding themselves in a situation where they are splitting, how do you start to rectify the situation there when it's clear that there's this financial imbalance, one person is holding all the cards?
So it's something when clients come in to our office, it's something that we try to identify right away. Again, usually it's very easy to identify when you see that it's a long-term relationship where one party was working and the other party was staying at home. That right off the bat, even without conversing with someone, you can assume that there may be an imbalance there. As family lawyers, where we have the ability to kind of bridge that gap or level the playing field is by way of the remedies that we can seek through court. So, for example, spousal support. If that's one of the things that's being held against them and being used as a pressure, we want to get spousal support going so they don't feel like I can only make moves forward if my spouse is giving me money to allow me to do it. You can also get an early advance on equalization, so on your property settlement, to give you the money to actually participate in the court process if you're going to court, or participate in the negotiations, because sometimes that's where the imbalance starts. It's that one party doesn't have the money to even move forward with legal representation.
I wanted to ask you what the legal framework, because of course this ends up in court. How much of it is sort of, as a divorce lawyer, well, we think we can work out this arrangement, but I imagine there's always that element of risk when you go before a judge and ultimately what they're going to decide who gets what.
Absolutely. There is an element of risk, but for the most part, when it comes particularly to married couples, the law is pretty set in terms of the fact that property is split 50-50. And when you are in a long-term relationship where one party has sacrificed their career for the sake of the relationship, you're going to get spousal support. Where the numbers are something that usually you learn as you go on, and as you collect disclosure and learn more about the relationship, you can pretty easily identify right off the bat if there's going to be a property entitlement and a spousal support entitlement.
Now, I imagine if the relationship developed in such a way where one person had all the financial cards and perhaps it wasn't even born of malice, but what about in a situation where someone has actively been hiding assets? How much more difficult does that get?
Well, this is where we say to, we give this advice that when you're starting off relationships and when we have people come in for marriage contracts or cohabitation agreements, make sure you're involved in this, because when it comes time, if there is a circumstance where someone has been hiding assets, it's not an easy task to find it. Sometimes people leave more of a paper trail than they realize, and we can find that, but sometimes it's a little bit harder. And in order to find that, it's going to cost you money. So being aware early on and having that understanding early on will save you money in the long run if it does happen that the relationship doesn't work out and you do separate.
Important discussion, important topics. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
That was Laura Paris, a family lawyer at Shulman Law Firm.